All right. I'll go ahead and just start with some introductions. My name is Janine. I work with SCORE. I'm a volunteer with SCORE Utah. On the screen, you can see a little bit about SCORE. SCORE is a not-for-profit through the Small Business Administration that is run entirely by volunteers. And we provide free mentoring for small business owners, for folks who have an idea or that are stuck in their growth or such. You can get a mentor assigned to you and work with them to help grow your business. We also offer these webinars and workshops, both locally, virtually, and in person. Watch our website for some events that are coming up in the next few weeks. Our webinars and such that we do, such as today's, we always record those, and those are also put into a library. And you can go and see those recorded webinars about a week or so after we finish the webinar. They are put up there. You can also see webinars there that from all over the country from different SCORE chapters. There's also a library of online resources that is vast. I have not yet been able to get to the bottom of it. There's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of guides and templates and checklists and all sorts of information for folks who are thinking about a business, uh, trying to grow a business, trying to exit a business, et cetera, et cetera. So please check out our website at any time. All of those resources are completely free to folks. If you have an interest in learning more about the chapter, we're always looking for volunteers, volunteer mentors, other folks who can help us with just guiding and leading the chapter. We cover all of Utah, as I mentioned. We have about 15 mentors. I think there's a little more than that now. We're onboarding some right now. There's our website there. There's also a QR code. If you have an interest in learning more about the chapter, we'd love to hear from you. With that, I am going to I have the pleasure of uh, introducing Wayne Myers. So Wayne is our speaker today. This is the third session in our three-part series on government contracting, and Wayne's going to be talking today about scaling and sustaining success in government contracting. He has worked with the government as a contractor and has been very successful. And so I hope he has a lot of great information for you. His colleagues, Sarah Ortiz and Paula Kramer, are also on. They are also from here to help you if you have any additional questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Wayne. Wayne, I will be checking the chat. Folks, if you have questions, please put them in the chat as opposed to the Q&A. That's easier for me to monitor, and I will try to push your questions to Wayne as they come up. So Wayne, the floor is
Thanks.
yours.
Thanks, Janine. And I'll start with two apologies. One is on my slides. They break many rules of good PowerPoint in that they're very wordy. Part of the reason is I wanted to make sure that you all had the information after the fact as well. So I'll put some color on the slides and the comments. I'll do my best not to read through them, but they will be there for you. And then the other part of the apology in advance is that there is a ton of acronyms in government contracting. And when you're in contracting for a number of years, it becomes second nature just to use those acronyms as words. So I will try, and I have tried in the PowerPoint to spell out a lot of the acronyms, but especially where it's important. But I'll immediately revert to the acronyms through the rest of the presentation just by default. So if I can get going here. Just a little bit about me. So I spent 30 years doing a lot of professional services management, consulting, technology, software, mostly in the health space. I worked for Cerner, which is the number one, last I checked, vendor of healthcare information system. If you go to the hospital, it's likely to be a Cerner system at some point in the hospital chain. And then in the government consulting industries for 20 years before I retired. Worked primarily with the federal government, a little bit with state and local. I'll be focused on federal today. State and local can be slightly different. Sometimes they inherit some of the rules and regulations at the federal level. So if you can do it for the feds, you probably can do it for state and locals as well. And I worked with, if you put federal and health together, you're going to get a lot of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Defense Health. Those agencies are the ones that I primarily worked with and managed a portfolio and a business unit. First for a large federal government contractor, SRA, which has been through a couple of mergers and acquisitions since I worked there, so their name's a little different these days. And then I co-owned a woman-owned 8A small business. So in the world of government contracting, the primary owner has to be at least a 51% owner, which is where my business partner was. I was the 49% owner. And in 5 years, we grew from about 500,000 in revenue the first year to 45 million. And year five, we were on the Inc. 500 list of fastest growing companies in America. We were 333 one year and 600 the next year. And then we were acquired in 2018, and then I served as president for a couple more years, and just happened to retire right before COVID. So that was probably good timing that I didn't have to worry about that. So I'm going to talk a lot about government contracting, how to get into government contracting, and how to stay compliant and grow. One of the things that you see on late night TVs, probably used to be with a guy with question marks on his suit, is that all you need to do is have a go into business, especially if you're a minority or a hub zone or something special, and the government's just going to hand you billions of dollars. That doesn't quite work that way. The reality is the government wants to give contracts and do contracting with stable businesses, ideally with a track record of success that they know can perform and be compliant with a lot of regulations, some of which I'll talk about today, and the contract requirements. So while you can be a brand new company, and there's probably famous and infamous examples of getting contracts without having a big track record of success in the government world, generally that's not the way things work, and it's a little bit harder than the government just handing you over money. So we'll talk about what that looks like and why. So in the world of government contracting, the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is the main set of rules that govern it. And so you'll hear me reference and talk a lot, and those in the government contracting world will talk a lot about the FAR. And so those, and then other relative regulations and things like that. So it's a complicated set of rules. The idea is basically the government should be fair in providing opportunities to small and large businesses, small businesses of many kinds, in a consistent and fair manner to make sure it's impartial in awarding the contracts and in awarding the work. And so there's also a lot of regulations and components of that around small business and what you can do and not do, some special favors, if you will, that the government puts out to small businesses. The government has goals for small business, so it's 23% today. They can always change it, but right now it's about 23% for small business contracting. So 23% of their total revenue, total contract awards, in theory, go to small business. It's a target. Sometimes they get more, sometimes they may have less, but that's their target. And then they have sub-targets for 8As, small business, veteran-owned small business, et cetera. Those may be in the 3 to 5% range per category. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. There's also regulations if you're doing work in the Department of Defense. So you've got DFARs that add additional regulations. And so it's complex enough that if you get into the world of government contracting, there are contract specialists, that's generally their title if you were looking them up on LinkedIn, that make a living understanding the FAR and government contracting because there's so much to understand and to keep you legal. So your average lawyer is not going to understand it as much as a contract specialist will, even if they're not a lawyer. So on the very basics of being compliant, if you're going to start a business and go into government contracting, you're obviously going to have some kind of legal business structure, be an LLC, maybe an LLC taxed as an S Corp. You could be a C Corp, those types of things. So you're going to have that, and you're going to register it with the IRS, obviously, to get your employer identification number. You're going to have to register in some state in the union and maybe multiple states, depending on what you're doing and how you're set up. And then you may have county and city regulations. So as a SCORE mentor, I talk with folks in the early stages about what those steps would look like. I encourage you to find a SCORE mentor if you are going down that road, regardless of whether you're going into government contracting. And then obviously you want to set up your business bank account, keep your business records separate from your personal, get an accounting system of some kind. It's a little more in-depth on the accounting system for government than just your average accounting system. So over time, QuickBooks may not be enough, or you have to set it up in a very specific way in order to do government cost accounting. Again, I'll come back to that in a little bit. And then you're going to register in some government databases. So there's a SAM.gov that you would look up. You'd get a unique entity identifier. You have NAICS code, so that's where you're going to do your work in a primary fashion. So say you're at IT and you plan on doing that for the government. So your primary NAICS code would be an IT code. And then you're going to get a cage code, register with DLA, etc. So there's a bunch of e-signatures that you're going to do as part of that, what we call reps and certs, representations and certifications. So it's things like I don't owe any back taxes. I'm not a felon. There's a whole bunch of things that you're attesting to under penalty if you're lying, and you're going to do that on essentially an annual basis. And so you'll also do that when you sign a contract with the government. There's a lot of attesting language that's as part of your reps and certs. You're going to get used to doing that. And then you're going to also want to, if you just started your business, by default, you're a small business. And then you're going to want to look into any relevant, what they call set-aside certifications. So if you're woman-owned, veteran-owned, 8A, which is essentially minority-owned, you could be a hub zone, and you could be multiples of these things. So as you saw in my intro, we were a woman-owned 8A, woman-owned disadvantaged business. And so what happens is when the government sets aside, so they could say this contract will only go to an 8A. And then as an 8A, we were a woman-owned business. They could also check those boxes and get credit for giving the work to that type of agency. So they get to check as many boxes as you are. And so the more boxes that you are, if you were a vet and a woman and a minority, and you set up your business and hire people from a hub zone, then you can have more opportunities. So again, there's rules around each one of those. And so you're going to want to make sure that you're eligible and that you maintain eligibility for things like a hub zone. So a little more on the small business set-asides. By default, you're a small business. So, but also you're competing against potentially very large small businesses. And so we were doing $45 million a year in revenue, and that was our last year as a small business. We were graduating and getting booting from the program because we were successful enough that we had exceeded our primary NAICS code revenue size. And so some of the small businesses, in quotes, can be under government contracting rules, can actually be very large businesses. So you have to remember, if it's just you starting a business or you and a couple of colleagues, you are competing against potentially very large multi-hundred person businesses in the work that gets done. And so you'll see some of these other veteran-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned, historically underutilized business zone is the hub zone I was mentioning. There's the 8A program, which can be especially advantageous because most of these other categories require competition for the actual work. There's a request for proposal that goes out and you respond to that with your proposal. But there's something under the 8A program called directed awards where without competition, the government can give you an award. At the time I was working, it was up to $4 million. They were looking to expand that over time and make it at larger awards. And so, so there's some good opportunity if you can convince the client that we can do this work. They can just give it to you without competition. You still go through the same, proposal and response process, and you still have a valid legal contract just as you would if it was competitive. But it's very advantageous then because you don't have to compete with others. And then there's a special category I doubt that anyone is in around Native 8As, so Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian organizations. So they have even more special 8A powers that I won't get into. So as you're talking about working with the government and growing, there's really three phases that we talk about that all require some degree of compliance and understanding. And so it's the pre-award, which includes the proposal submission process. So you're preparing your proposal and you're doing all the reps and certs that I was talking about. But in that preparing of the proposal, you have to understand what the requirements are for that specific proposal and in submitting a proposal to the government. So usually there's a business volume and a technical volume. So they don't even look at your business volume, your price essentially, until you are at least technically acceptable on the technical volume. And so you have to and then there's rules around, font requirements and spacing and margins and things like that, because they don't want you to, because they're going to give you 10 pages or 50 pages or 100 pages for this proposal. And anything beyond that page count, they will not review. And you can't cheat by then just squishing the font down to an 8-point font and making it unreadable. So, because in the past there's been, shenanigans, and so they have all the rules in place. They figured out all the rules that the contractors use, and all the tricks. And so they put these rules in place in order to prevent that. And so we have to have a good submission. It has to be a valid submission. And then there's the award phase where they're saying, hey, you're the winner, or it's an 8A direct award. And so there's a bazillion contract clauses. So they're going to reference a whole pile and pages of FAR requirements and other terms of conditions that you're going to have to live under. And it's not a lot of negotiation there. The only things that we've ever negotiated where we would ask questions to say, there's no IT project, or there's no IT system, but you're requiring us to, submit some kind of information system security plan. What are we, proposing that on? And it was essentially a cut and paste error. And so they'd say, yeah, no, you can take that out. So there's a few things like that. But for the most part, if the government says these are the clauses and these are the terms and conditions, you are stuck with them. And then post-award, where you're actually doing the work of the contract, then there's all kinds of performance monitoring and reporting requirements that are going to be part of, and that'll be specified in the RFP, in the original award process. So those are the things that you have to stay compliant before, during, and post award, as you're doing your work. So just to try to give you some contrast, I worked in the commercial world, and how you do sales is a little bit different. So you take people out golfing and to dinners and those types of things. You can't do that in the government world. You can do it in a limited basis as long as it's de minimis amount. But for the most part, the government would refuse to do anything with you like that. And so you'll do a marketing meeting, but that's the extent of it. And so in the commercial world, there's not many rules around the sales process, and what the contracts look like could be a little more flexible because it's easy to make changes. But in the government, it's that process that I just talked about, very well refined and structured, and they do a best value competition, which may take months, or I've seen it take even years if you've got protests. And so it's not going to be quick. You have to have patience. So I also mentor folks that think they just go, I want to get into government contracting. It's like, great. But first, you have to have a real business. And second, you have to have patience, because it may take you a year to 2 years just to get, enough underneath or to track on a piece of work that you can absolutely do. And so you're not going to do that overnight. The contracts on both sides, whether it's commercial or government, will tend to have a statement of work. The government will have a lot of that mandatory language that I talked about, and other kinds of things that you have to attest to in the reps and certs. If you're doing subcontracting, if you are a subcontractor or you're doing subcontracting, usually in the commercial space, it's behind the scenes and no one sees it. In the government space, they absolutely want you to name your subcontractors, and they may actually have to approve it. So you can't just willy-nilly, bid with a large business contractor, and then just decide, we're going to cut them out when we win this. That's not how it works. I've even seen the government there's something called key personnel, where if you name somebody key personnel, that means they are important to that project, and you can't even swap them out without government approval. If you decide to put them on a new contract that you won, the government has to approve that. And so there's things like that not quite as easy when it comes to subcontracting. And then if you're going to do a modification on the contract, on the commercial side, as long as you and your client agree, it's easily done, as long as it takes to change the wording, add an addendum. In government contracting, it's a big deal to do a contract mod, especially if you're trying to get more money. They have to have the budget, and they have to do the formal mod, which is a often lengthy and bureaucratic process. And the government, I've had them say, your contract's done, or we're not renewing. The last day of our contract year, they would tell me, we're not renewing your contract, and all of your people are done here. And so that kind of stuff happens as well. Most of the time, once you get a government contract, they go through the whole process, but they have the right not to. So as you talk about as we talk about subcontracting a little bit more, um, this process is heavily governed by the FAR that I mentioned. And so there's a couple things you need to look at, which is should you even bid? The if you're just seeing on SAM.gov, what used to be Fed BizOps, opportunities that the government is publishing, if you have even if you could perfectly do that work based on your experience as a contractor, as a company, if you haven't pre-marketed that to the client, if they don't know who you are, it is very unlikely for you to win that. It's just the way it is. There's other companies that will have been in there pre-marketing that. There's always exceptions. I'm just telling you in general. You want to make sure that you're eligible as an organization. So if it says it's set aside for 8A and you're not an 8A, you're not eligible. Um, if there's certain requirements in that request for proposal in the RFP, and you don't have that, if you don't have those qualifications or performance, you can't live up to those performance metrics, you may have to subcontract out. So you could partner with generally a large business, maybe another niche small business in order to go do that work. You have to, as a team with your partners, perform everything that's in the RFP section C, which is the statement of work. And then you need to meet all those contract clauses that are going to be contained within that as well. If you're a small business, you can't just turn around and give, 90% of the business to a large business and just have it as a pass through. That's not legal. And so your company has to perform at least 51% of the work. And so if it's set aside for small business 8A, whatever. And then will you win is the other when you're looking at whether you should bid. So section M in the RFP will tell you because there's the evaluation factor. So if they're putting, 50% of the score on past performance, that really favors the incumbent who's already doing the work because their past performance, assuming they're doing a good job as the existing contractor, is going to give them half the points they need in order to win that work. So displacing when the work already exists, displacing an incumbent is a very difficult task. They know the work well, they've been doing the performance of that work, and if the government likes them, they're likely to have their bid scored quite nicely. And so those are things that you have to think about that we always thought about as a government contractor when we were looking at bid. And then this is as a prime, you need to certify that your cost and pricing data is accurate. So you can't just make up a number and then hope to get more money later. It doesn't work that way. I've seen small businesses get pushed to the brink of bankruptcy because they underbid a contract, even a firm fixed price contract, and they were losing money every hour they worked. So you want to make sure you understand your numbers and you're just not making things up. And then, as I mentioned before, your bid can be thrown out if you have the wrong font size. So you have to follow all instructions in section L of the solicitation exactly. You can also be a subcontractor. So you would go to other large businesses, or if you're a niche player, but you can do a piece of that work, you can go find other small businesses, large businesses that are going to be the prime, and you're going to be a subcontractor. Again, often large businesses. So the good thing is the prime has full responsibility for client performance. So even if you screw up, your large business partner is not going to be happy with you, but the government's not going to be happy with the large business prime. It's not really your fault per se in the eyes of the government. You'll get a bad reputation once the word gets around, but legally, it's the prime's responsibility. So they may just pull the work from you for poor performance. But the prime will also pass through in your subcontract all the statement of work elements, other kinds of performance requirements, reporting requirements that I've mentioned before. But it is a great way to build qualifications, to build your experience. So if you are starting out, I would look for in the areas that you're interested in. If it's DoD, there's that set of contractors. If it's in the civil federal government space, if it's in the health space, HHS. So they all have their favorite contractors, and you can go look up through public sources and see exactly how much these big companies make out of CDC, out of HHS. And so you can find that out and go try to contact those organizations and see if you can be a subcontractor to them. Because even a single person piece of work. The large is worthwhile to you all when you get started. And large businesses also have, when I said the government has 23% small business targets, large business contractors also are required to have small business targets. So they are actually incentivized to bring small businesses onto their contracts whenever they can. So as you get awarded a contract, there's going to be, this is where that contract specialist can come into play and can help you, because you're going to see all kinds of contract clauses and flow down clauses. If you have a prime contractor, they're just going to say the government requires us to do this, we're requiring you to do that. And as I mentioned, the government loves to cut and paste from the previous solicitations and contracts. So sometimes clauses don't apply at all, and you can have them removed either from your prime or from the government. But that's the extent that you're probably ever going to negotiate those clauses. And so understanding and having compliance with those contracts, terms and conditions is very important. And mainly the one that's going to get you is around the IT space. There's a lot of information system security challenges. If you're doing anything with an IT system, or even just the government, gives you data and information, or you're creating documents, for example, your system needs to meet certain requirements. You can't just have it on your home PC. It won't meet government requirements for storing of information from the government, even if it's not, sensitive but unclassified, secret, top secret, those kinds of things. So you're going to have an understanding, especially on the IT systems, as to where you can store. There's cloud solutions for that that'll help you. But again, you can't take that lightly, because it's part of what's required. You don't want to have a data breach on your record, if you will. This is more than you'll ever probably want to know or need to know, but here's some example regulations that you're going to be facing. So some are around just being an employer. So you got your Fair Labor Standards Acts and OSHA and EEO kinds of things. There's a Service Contract Act. So there's for certain for certain positions that are under government contracting, they have very specific pre-negotiated rates and fringe benefits requirements. So if you see a government contract that says it's under the Service Contract Act, for those workers that you provide, you have to provide them with it's not a negotiable rate. You can always pay them more, but you can't pay them less. So think like it's almost like a union contract. There's limitations on subcontracting. So as I said, you can't be a small business and give 90% to a large business. And then the cyber protection, your accounting that I just mentioned, your accounting and financial system. So you need to have a compliant cost accounting system. So even if you're doing normal, very good GAAP accounting, generally accepted accounting principle accounting, this cost accounting is different and more, and you need to understand it and you need to follow it, because the government will not give you a cost plus contract without that. You have to say that you're compliant. So you have to understand what that is and make sure your accounting meets those requirements. It's a little different than just average accounting. And then you may have other regulations. And the False Claim Act is a big one, where I say you have to do reps and certs where you're attesting to certain things. If you knowingly submit false claims to the government, the damage is pretty severe. So you have to make sure. Now, some of these things that I mentioned don't apply to small businesses. They're trying not to burden small businesses too much. But your prime contractor will often pass all these through to you. So you may be under them regardless, to the extent that they apply. So as you go into performance in your actual contracts, then you want to make sure that it's a very serious thing. Like every deliverable, if they say a weekly report, you have to give them a weekly report, even if the client said, monthly is good. You would technically need a contract mod if you're only going to give them a monthly report. So you do exactly what it says, even if the client kind of casually says it's not required. You need some kind of documentation if you're going to change something. So obviously in the performance phase, you're doing the actual work of the project that you're getting paid for. But there's other things around that. There may be monitoring of the performance. So and you have to be careful about what you're promising. So we had a contract where we were the incumbent, and it was some data entry. And so our data entry accuracy was 98%. It was measured as part of the work. And in the next RFP that came out where we rewon the work, it said that the requirement was 97%. And we said in our proposal that we will do 98% because that's where we were at. And when we fell just a hair below that, it was like 97.9, the government said, you're not compliant. And we said in the RFP, it said 97%. And they said, yes. But in your proposal, you said you'd be at 98%. And so that's the standard because that's what you told us you would do. So you have to be very careful about what you promise in the proposal. It's not a place to have a lot of fluffy marketing language or salesy kinds of things to overpromise because it becomes part of the contract by incorporation, and you have to be very careful about overpromising because you can be held to that. And then in the corporate compliance as a company, you're going to be looking at it's very anytime you're trying to do some processes or corporate compliance outside firms, Malcolm Baldrige Award, those kinds of things, they all have the same three concepts here. So it's basically, do you have a policy, a program, a process? Do people know about it? And are they following it? And then can you prove it, right? And so ultimately for HR, for your program management, for other components of your overall corporate infrastructure, I'll call it, you're going to want to make sure you've got policies and procedures. People have roles and responsibilities that are well defined. So that is foundation for that program. And then you're going to want to train and educate people. So people that come in the door. The best example that I can give you is we were a no drug workplace, a drug-free workplace, right? And even in places where marijuana may be legal, it would be against our policy to go out to lunch and get stoned for obvious corporate reasons. But we had to have where it was desirable, I'll say, to have a actual policy that says we're a drug-free workplace. So you can't come in after you've been drinking. You can't work when you've been smoking, those kinds of things. And then we had to have that as part of our overall training education. So if someone did come in and we had one time long ago when I worked for a large business, someone who the client said came back from lunch drunk, then we were able to address that from an HR perspective because we had a policy, people signed off on the policies and procedures. We had trained people to say even one line in a PowerPoint when they were in orientation that we're a drug-free workplace. And then we had a firm legal grounds to let that person go because they were in gross violation of our rules. So those are the kinds of things that you want to have as a good company in order to protect yourself legally and to make sure that the government knows that you are able to handle the kind of work that we're talking about. And then there's a lot of monitoring and auditing, both around financial and around your program itself. And so, are you are you meeting your contract requirements? Are you billing for everything that you're supposed to bill for? Are you for your cost accounting system? Are you taking care of your costs and accounting for them in a way that is in alignment with government cost accounting standards? And then having both internal audits and external audits as part of that. I'm not saying as a small business you need to do all this day one. I'm just saying in the government contracting world, the more you can act like a big business, the more they're going to like you and the better you're going to run your organization. So there's a lot of consequences of noncompliance. So in the commercial world, if you're non-compliant with stuff, your client may not be happy with you, and you may or may not get additional work from them, or you may have a bad reputation. That happens in the government space too, but it may not be as serious as this list here. So if you get a bad rap, you may not win any because most of it's going to be competitive. You may not win any government contracts. The reputational damage may be severe. If you have a cybersecurity breach and you've leaked a bunch of government data through your systems, not a good look. And the next time the government's, looking at one of your proposals, they're going to remember when you say, we have good security that you do not. There are things such as corrective action plans, so the government can go through a formal process where they can essentially scold you for not living up to what you're supposed to. And then it brings in some special oversight and some headaches that you don't want. They could terminate your contract for performance. They could terminate the contract. Most contracts that you get from the government will be like, 5-year contract, but it's really 1 year base and 4-year options. So if you're really bad, the easiest way for them to get rid of you is just to not renew the option years. And so that's a good way for them to terminate your contract and just give it to an 8A or somebody else without competition, just to get you out. Um, you can actually be suspended from SBA programs like the 8A program. You can be debarred and prevented from bidding on any future government contracts. And then there's also very serious civil and criminal penalties, often focused on the owners of the company. So you can't just kind of casually throw together a government contract and do the work and not manage it, because there's some serious fines and penalties that could come to you specifically as a business owner. So we'll talk a little bit about scaling up and down in this world. The good thing if you're in the professional services space is you have indirect and direct costs, right? So the indirect costs are things like G&A, so management of the company as an executive, legal. Sometimes you can have HR in that, you can have HR there. And then overhead, you've got office space, your program management staff, things like that. And then your fringe benefits. So those are the three things that you're going to put into your pricing that the government is used to seeing all that indirect spending. The direct costs are your actual employees or 1099 contractors, independent contractors that you bring in to do the work. But the good news in a professional services organization is until you win, you don't hire those people in general. So you're not going to be spending a bunch of money until you need to. And so when you're scaling up, or unfortunately, in some cases, when you scale down, it's really can you get enough work to pay for your indirect costs, right? The management of the company, what it takes to have an accounting staff or send it out to a third party accounting firm, those kinds of things, you have to pay for all of that. And then the direct costs are really should be part of your overall success because you've got contracts that you're currently working and you've priced it well, so you're making a profit on every hour that they work. On the flip side is if you lose a contract last minute or otherwise, as I talked about, then you can just downsize. So it's part of the you hope that as the government is awarding contracts, you win some here and hopefully lose as few over there as possible, and you can move people from one contract to another. But the reality is, a lot of times the people will be working on the same work and the same work that is under contract for maybe 3 different contractors over time. So they just change companies and they continue to do the work for that agency under the new contract, whether you own it or not. And so a lot of times you just let those people go and say, I don't have anything else for you. And so, the new company that won that contract wants to hire you, that's up to them. But our time here is done. So that's very typical in the government contracting space. But if you don't scale well, so if we call it running too lean or too fat on the indirects. So if you're too lean and you don't have enough executive management or accounting staff or whatever, you're going to have potential for poor performance and you're missing your quality checks and things like that. So government's often not happy with you if you're not well managed, essentially. And if you're too fat, and you have what we call a wrap rate that's too high, meaning when you take your costs and then you add and you burden them with your indirect costs, it's so expensive. If you're at a 2.0 wrap rate, then you're as expensive as a large business. And if you're in the small business world, you're not going to be competitive. And so usually you want to run between 1.6 and 1.8 as a wrap rate. And I can explain more the math if anyone cares, but that just means you're not going to win anything because when the government says you're technically acceptable and they go look at your price, you're never going to be best value because you're so expensive. And then the other thing is if you keep losing staff and things, you have to lay off those staff. You have your unemployment insurance rates will go up. That hurts quite a bit, but it's part of being in that space. And then also, you don't want to have a reputation or gain a reputation over time for being an employer that can't take care of their staff. So if you're just constantly hiring and throwing people out because you're winning, losing contracts, not a good place to be. So if you're constantly growing, as we were, we often, for the best people, could move them to a new contract because we'd win something over here, even if a contract ended elsewhere. So here's some resources. Some were mentioned in the introduction. So obviously the Small Business Administration that we work closely with, the SAM.gov that I was talking about, where you would register your small business, obviously SCORE, of which I'm a mentor. And you can find mentors either, it doesn't have to be within Utah. You could find a mentor across the country if you're not from Utah and you're looking for a mentor or a subject matter expert. And then the Apex folks who are on the phone with us, and then we do a lot with Arizona as well. So you've got some of the Utah and the Arizona folks listed here, or their websites. So that's the end of my planned comments. And so I'll take, if Janine, if you have any questions, we've got not quite 20 minutes left.
Yeah, I don't have any questions that's come in, folks. You're welcome to add them to the chat if you have questions for Wayne or for Sarah or Paula with Apex.
Government contracting is so exciting. They probably all fell asleep. They've dozed off.
No.
So the summary, if there's anybody typing now, the summary that I'll give folks is it is not necessarily easier. So if I were to say what is easier versus harder, there's some things in the commercial space that are easier because if you can find a client that likes you, you could have a contract done with them as soon as your golf round is over. That's the government, that's the commercial space, right? That's the private industry. But if in the government space, you are never going to have such a golf game, and the government will never tip their hat to say, yeah, we want you in here. You still, and even if they do, even if you find somebody as you sit down and talk with the government about a specific piece of work, and they'd say, yeah, we'd love to have you bid. We'd love to have you guys in here. We think you can do it. That means nothing because they still have to go through a formal process with a team of reviewers that are objectively reviewing your proposal. And if your proposal is bad, if your price isn't competitive, so you become not a best value choice, you will lose even if the government wants you. And I've seen it many, many times. Things go my way because we had a great bid, and things went the other way because someone came in and lowballed, and the government took a chance on a lower price. And so definitely not, so it's a fair process on the government side as opposed to when I was in the commercial world. I thought we were ready to sign a contract, and then somebody came in and just undercut me on price, and contract got signed right out from underneath me. So definitely not fair in that world. Much more fair in the government space, but takes a lot longer because of that process.
All right, Wayne, we do have a question from Michael. He's saying, this seems intimidating. I work in a DoD agency, felt like a monster. What would you recommend as the first two steps to start entering this space?
So I don't know what the felt like a monster meant, but it's a bit intimidating. I would say there's a bit of eating the elephant here, which is you don't have to know or do everything at once. But if you are going to go into the government contracting space, you absolutely need help. So I realized when I moved from the commercial world into the federal government contracting space, it took me probably 6 months to learn 80% of what I needed to know. And then I spent the next 20 years, and this is not an exaggeration, learning a bunch of that last 20% because I kept seeing things where I would say, well, it's been in my 10 years, in my 15 years of government contracting, I've never seen this. This is a new one. And so you will always see and learn new things as you go. So I would say the basics as to what I'm saying, you could catch up on in 6 months, but you definitely are going to want to have a contract specialist expert. You're going to want to have accounting people that understand government accounting over time. Those are two spaces that you definitely want to have help. If you can have someone who led, like I did, in a large or small business, if you can have a partner or one of your early hires, someone who's been in this government contracting space who understands a lot of the stuff that I just went through in terms of the process and the RFP and how to respond, that's pretty critical in order to do that. Again, I think you could catch up as someone who, is just used to the government, who understands the DoD. So that's the other part of it is understanding. So I got to understand CDC very well. And so, how they what kind of work they need, what kind of proposals they were looking for, what spoke to them. I couldn't take a CDC proposal and turn around and give it to the DoD. They talked very differently. So understanding your client or finding people, consultants, et cetera, that understand that exact client that you're trying to sell to, I put sell in quotes, that you're trying to sell to is extremely important. So you're going to have to find some subject matter experts, some of which I just mentioned, in order to be successful here, no doubt. So you'll be able to learn a good portion of that pretty quickly, but you need some help.
We've got a couple of other questions come in, so
Great.
I'm gonna go with this one. This is anonymous. What are the appropriate steps to perform sequentially after winning a contract? Can SCORE recommend legal persons for contract review for necessities of compliance? So I think the answer is we don't provide legal advice, but Wayne, I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, so we generally, if we're asked for recommendations, we will give you three recommendations for legal, for accounting, or those types of things. Then you can go suss them out. So we're not. We also don't just say, "Hey, these are the best accountants," because we don't want to have a conflict of interest if it happens to be run by my cousin or something like that. Again, I'll say the vast majority of the SCORE mentors, if they don't have experience in government contracting, they won't be able to recommend an accounting firm or a legal slash contract specialist type that'll be specific to government contracting, and you're better off just finding one maybe through LinkedIn, because it's different. Again, if I go to a general accounting firm, that's great for a normal business. They're not going to understand government cost accounting. You're going to have to go find somebody who understands that. If you are reviewing a contract from the government, a lawyer is going to have their head explode if they look at all of the requirements and the references of the incorporation of the FAR clauses into your contract. And so you're going to want to make sure that you find a contract specialist who can understand that, say, hey, this is all standard. These clauses are a little weird that we might want to talk to the government about. So that would be my recommendation. You can go to SCORE, but just be careful about if you just get a list of accountants or a list of legal, they probably won't know this world quite as well as you will want them to.
All right, thank you. All right, one more question. I'd be interested in hearing your experience pitching yourself to government agencies. How
Oh,
did you prepare for the meeting with the agency, teaming partners, etc.?
yeah, that is a very good question, actually. So a lot of times the government will refuse to take meetings from contractors, but it kind of depends on the agency and the ask. So you have to try to find a way in and get down with the government, sit down with the government. You also have to remember there's two sets of people that you will ultimately deal with within the government. There's the contract specialists on the government side, the contracting officers. They, in theory, if you're a small business, are always required to take a business meeting with you if you ask. So the contract specialists, the contracting officers on the government side that are the ones to ultimately sign their name to the contracts, they're more of the process people to make sure that, they're the ones that are putting out the RFP. But in the RFP, all the statement of work and that kind of stuff comes from what we call the program. So the program is who you're actually going to do work for. So when you win work, and then I'll come back to your question, when you win work, you are answering to two sets of people: the program people, the program executives who want to make sure that you're getting the work performed and performed to the level that they have in the contract, and then the actual contract steps like the reporting and anything else, the process that's on the contract side. So the contracting people will always get meetings. I would start there because if you do a presentation to them, sometimes they'll hold like a small business day and things like that. And so you can go in as one of 10 small businesses that are lined up to give your pitch. And so think like Shark Tank kind of pitch where you say, this is who we are, this is why we're awesome. So you'll have your standard pitch deck, and you're going to want to dress nicely and look professional and pretend that you understand government contracting really well. and you also understand, technology or, health or public health or whatever the niche is for that particular agency, right? DoD in the example of the last gentleman's question. So they'll generally but they're not the ones to actually do the award. They're not the ones who are reviewing your proposals outside of your business proposal. So the program people are the ones that you really want to convince in advance of the RFP that you can do the work and that you're awesome. They may or may not take the meeting. So the real trick might be if you can identify who they are, then just ask them. My advice and what I've told the staff that worked for me over time is it's almost never illegal for you to ask the question of the government. It may be illegal for them to answer the question. And so, to give you an example, we would often ask the government on a piece of work that we were talking about with them, what is the budget for that? The government has a standard, I don't know if we call it a rule, that if they are if they do something for one contractor, they have to do something for all contractors. So it would be improper for them to meet with you and then tell all other contractors, no, we're not going to meet with you. It would be improper for them to tell you the budget that they have and then not tell the next contractor that asks. So we got into the mode of just ask the question and let the government decide because they could politely decline to answer that. And many times they would. But on rare occasion, they would tell us exactly what their budget was, which was very helpful to our bid. And so in the actual discussions and presentations, what I would make sure is you try to bring someone, even if it's a subject matter expert in that particular area. So we worked with a lot of CDC. So even though I can talk intelligently with CDC public health people because my career was in the health space and IT and those kinds of things, if they were talking about, if we were going to meet with the diabetes division, I would bring someone from our team that had some good experience there. And it was just interesting to watch because sometimes the client would talk a lot with me and talk what I would call business, and maybe, get to understand our organization more. So I would do a more standard sales pitch. And sometimes they would gravitate right toward the subject matter expert and they would have the entire conversation and I would keep my mouth shut because we were showing how smart we were on the particular topic that they were interested in. And so I would think so very much of it doesn't hurt to ask and ask for a meeting. Don't be insulted when they say no. You can ask different people within the program because sometimes the senior most executive will say no, but if you find a more junior person in there, they'll say yes to a meeting, and it's fine. You do want to be prepared to do a sales pitch. A lot of times we wouldn't do like a very formal PowerPoint presentation like this and stand up and be all corporate. We would just kind of verbally go through. I would physically hand them some PowerPoint and I'd say, you can look at this later. And I would just give them like a high level verbal version of that. So not to bore them too much because I wanted to make sure they had plenty of time to talk and to ask questions. And if they wanted to flip through the boring PowerPoint later, that was up to them. But I wanted to have a conversation as much as possible. And then sometimes we would go, there's another trick of the trade, is sometimes we would just do one-on-one meetings and not bigger groups of people, depending on who we got to meet with. And the reason is because if I go back to my example and I asked them, hey, what's your budget? And they said, a certain amount. I also didn't take notes on purpose. I would put it in my head as much as possible and then write it down as soon as I left the meeting. The reason is if they see you taking notes, they're going to be much more closed lip because now you have a record of everything that was said. If there's multiple people in the meeting, then multiple people could be asked if there's a shenanigans going on, what was said in that meeting, and if there's two people with the same recollection. So we also got in the habit of one-on-one meetings, oftentimes with me and the client. I wouldn't take notes during the meeting because then it felt more like a conversation and I'm not staring at my notebook. And then they could always deny that they ever told me something because they know I didn't write it down. So a little trick of the trade. But yeah, so the summary of all of that I just spewed out is just ask and try again and try different people. And then you just want to hear, because ultimately what you're really trying to get to is, do they have work that you could potentially do? What does that work look like? Are there any red flags? Do they like their current incumbent or not? You could say, hey, how is XYZ company doing? How are they performing? Because if they say great, we love them, that might be not something you're going to go after. But you want to know red flags, you want to know hot buttons, whatever you want to call it. So that way you're going to put those into your proposal, because you're going to say, hey, government, we know this is really important to you, and we take this very seriously, or we're going to handle that well. So the more you can get to that, a conversation about that particular piece of work, the better. They see contractors come and go all the time, and so, especially small businesses, I should say, large businesses tend to be there forever. And so, they want to know that you're a decent company, but, don't spend 45 minutes hammering into them how wonderful you are. You want to hear as much from them as possible. That was a great question.
All right. Yeah, thank you. There's one more question. We have just another couple of minutes.
Okay.
How can we, and you may have actually answered this in your previous answer, Sarah Lambrinos. How can we determine if our proposed pricing is competitive and aligned with government contract standards?
Yeah. So some of it is the general rules that I talked about. If you're a small business, you're probably at a wrap rate of 1.6 to 1.7, which means for every, like if I'm putting somebody into the wrap rate means you're taking whatever your costs are and then you're burdening them with your indirects. And so if I am paying a consultant $100 an hour, then I charge the government without, if there's no profit, $160 to $170 an hour. So that's why I say wrap rate, it's 1.6 times that your cost. And then you may have, 5 or 10% on top of that for profit. And so if your wrap rate is much higher than 1.7 as a small business, you're probably not competitive. Large businesses are generally in the 1.8 to 2.3 wrap rate. If you're 2.0 or above, you better be very good. So that's kind of a generic answer to your question. And then the other more specific answer is, it kind of depends on what the government has. Because I've seen them, if you read the RFP, we've had this before, where you read the RFP and it looks like they want a team of 5 people. But when you talk to them, it's like, what's your budget? It's like $100,000 a year. Like, oh, okay. So there's a very distinct and big difference sometimes between what's in that RFP and what you're reading it as and what they really have. So you want to get in there and ask them, how many people are doing the work now? How many you think are going to, if it's new work, how many you think are going to be doing it? That'll help you right price it for what they have. What is your budget? As I mentioned, is a good question.
All right, fantastic. Thank you again, Wayne. I want to, just take a minute and thank Sarah and Paula and the Apex Accelerator Group with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity for putting this together and organizing this three-part webinar series. And they also did some presentations. Wayne, this has been fantastic. It's a really great um, uh, ending to this three-part series. This has been fantastic. Sarah, Paula, thank you so much for all the coordination. Wayne, thank you for your time today. And folks, as always, these webinars are recorded and they will be on the SCORE website in the next week or so. I did put a PDF of Wayne's slides into the chat early on, so you should see it there. And again, thank you everyone. Sarah, anything, Paula, you want to just close with any kind of comments?
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate SCORE's support. And Wayne, he always has great words for everyone. He's quite an experienced person in government contracting, and takes and kind of simplifies it, puts it down to a kind of a 101. And I really appreciate how he presents.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.